Welcome back to the Fixed Ops Roundtable. This panel is about leading radical change in automotive retail, and with us today are the leaders. I'd like to introduce them to the roundtable today, beginning with Mike Cavanaugh from Lithia and Driveway, Brian Kramer from Cars.com and AccuTrade, Ed Roberts from Bozard Ford Lincoln, Fred Forden, who is the creator of Dealer ASR, and Steve Westner from Blue Oceans Global Consulting. Everybody, welcome back to the Fixed Ops Roundtable, and thank you so much for being with us today. I'd like to start our questions off today. Mike, coming to you first. What does radical change in the retail auto industry look like to you over the next 5, even 10 years?
That's a great question, Ted. So I would say radical change to me, first and foremost, means, really serving our customers wherever, whenever, and however they desire. I think, that means new cars, used cars, purchasing vehicles. Brian, and what you're doing over there is amazing when it comes to purchasing vehicles from customers, service, removing friction. Ed on the phone as well here too. Amazing industry leader with what that means, I think, to folks. So when it comes to radical change, I think first and foremost, it's serving customers wherever, whenever, however. And at the most simplistic level, I worked for a gentleman for a number of years. He was a self-made billionaire in the automotive industry, right? And he had one saying, and it was, you can't sell anything by saying no. And I think we have to remind ourselves of the simplicity of this. We're in this world where we're all about technology and innovation and all these things. At the most simplistic level, radical change means we have to stop all of the saying no, right? We have to figure out a way to say yes. So it's not, can we do this? It's how might we do this? How can we do this? How can we better serve our customers? So I think radical change at a simple level means that. And it really means getting back to the basics. I think we're in a period of time, coming out of 2021 and 2022, where we probably have some of the worst salespeople and the laziest managers we've ever had in the automotive industry, right? So if we want to lead radical change, we have to confront, the brutal facts and the hard truths right now in our industry that, we got fat and happy and we got lazy, and we need to change that, right? So it's not just about technology and innovation, but it's about getting back to the basics. And I would say, we have to really focus on what got us here won't get us there, right? And remind ourselves of that. What made us really successful last year and the year before would probably lead to failure in 2023. So if we want to have radical change, we have to be ready to work really, really hard to just get back to where we were in 2022. So I would say that's probably what I would start off with.
Brian, your thoughts on leading radical change in automotive retail?
Well, I think Mike touched on quite a few of them. What got you here won't get you there. I've read that book, and it was a journey I had to go on, because the way I used to do things, and I've had to go through that cycle multiple times. And I think that, as Mike's saying, it all comes back to the consumer and enhancing that experience. And I think that we're going to have to address the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is with existing dealership leadership is the loss of control in what they perceive as control currently, and enabling and empowering others. And by giving away control, you'll actually gain control. But there's such a loss aversion, and people focus on what is being taken away. And it's been happening since the 90s when, I got into this business. Oh, well, they're going to price vehicles online, and now they're going to allow people to just, price tires online. Well, Tire Rack's already doing that, and you've got to be competitive with whatever the market is doing, and you've got to go on offense instead of playing defense. And I think that in many cases, especially over the next 5 years, getting past the thought of, oh, am I going to get replaced by a robot, and look at what you may be losing and focus on what you're going to be gaining. The other thing that I would say is that you have to, over the next 5 years, the siloed command and control leadership style that we all, came up under is going to have to be decentralized, and you're going to have to involve others in the decision. It's going to have to be more collaborative, and it's not a one-man band, and it's not a one-man show. I mean, when I was at Germain in my former life, we had a skunkworks team, and we were constantly, it was an innovation team, and most of the best ideas didn't come from me. They came from everybody in that room by stress testing everything. So I think it's a journey. And Alex Vetter says all the time, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So I would leave it at that.
Wow. Powerful stuff. Ed Roberts, you're on the front lines at Bozard Ford Lincoln, a leader in innovation, and talk to us about radical change.
It's thinking outside the box, and really, it's not even thinking outside the box. It's shifting the mindset from I've always done it that way, and it's meeting customers on their terms. And we still, in the automobile industry across the board, force customers to come back and do business on our terms. And over the next 10 years, we have to embrace, we can fight it all we want, but we have to embrace click to buy. We have to embrace all those things. Our fancy showroom is not what's going to draw people in 10 years from now. If we're not showing up in people's driveways, we're missing the boat. And that's not just on the sales side, it's on the service side as well. EV is forcing us, is forcing the industry to shift to go take care of these vehicles out in field. And if we don't do that, then yes, we're ahead of the aftermarket right now. They can't service a lot of EVs, but they will find ways to do it. And they will find ways to do it by hiring the people that you have to go do it with. So we got to embrace ways to find ways to meet customers on their terms rather than ours. That's what's made Amazon what they are today. And that's what we have to shift to. It's convenient. They can do it anytime. And it doesn't take anything away from them. They don't have to spend time in traffic going back and forth or whatever else. They don't have to spend time in our showroom and then waiting to get terrorized in the F&I office. We have to find ways to meet them on their terms, and click to buy is what we have to embrace going forward.
Let me do a follow-up question, if I can, with Mike Cavanaugh. Mike, on some of the comments that we're hearing from Brian, yourself, and Ed, how will fixed operations, in your opinion, play into that radical change? Will that be a big part of it over the next 5 to 10 years? A lot of forces, a lot of things changing here in 2023.
Massive part of it. I think the fixed op part of a dealership is probably the least appreciated part of the dealership. It's kind of the engine of the car, right? If you think about a car in general and how beautiful the exterior of the car is and how beautiful the interior of the car is, right? That's like the dealership itself. That's the sales team. That's F&I. That's all the people with the fancy clothes on and the Ferragamos and the Rolexes, right? But the engine and the transmission of the car is the service department, right? That's what really keeps the car running. That's what actually the function of the car itself is. And that's really what drives the business for the dealership. And I think we've talked so much about, digital retailing and selling cars online and buying cars and all of these things, but servicing customers, right? That's what keeps customers. That's what makes people excited about being loyal to a brand. And I mean, that's why I really love to listen to Ed whenever he has something to say, because he's an innovator in that space, right? And he has that fixed ops background. I think that is probably, we've talked about that 10 to 20% when we've talked about retailing and selling cars, 80 to 90%. So I think that's where we really can make some huge strides this year is how do we create an excellent customer experience with fixed ops versus just variable and have the focus there.
Great point. Steve Westner, in a former life, when you worked at an OEM, I know you called on Ed's dealership, and you've told me about all the opportunities that you pointed out many, many years ago at that St. Augustine operation. Steve, talk to us a little bit about leading radical change, because I know that's a near and dear to your heart.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting because I called on Fred Bozard way back in the day when it was a small little store that honestly, it took you forever to find it. And you showed up and Fred was there and he had his plans for what he was going to do in the future. And I was telling Ed this, after 7 years of talking with him about it, they were yellow. And he was still showing them to us at the factory. Yep, this is what I'm going to do. This is the plan. And every year we included it in the business plan, and every year it didn't materialize. And then I remember after I'd left Florida and then I came back, I drove up 95 and all of a sudden, boom, wow, this thing has now materialized. It was amazing to see the change. But I do think that when you talk about the change in the business, it's really a lot more than the physical change of facilities and those kind of things. And I do agree with Mike and Brian that it's more than technology, okay? In many ways, it is how you go about doing the day-to-day things. And I think these things are going to start to change and evolve. People are going to work better with technology, not get replaced by it. People are going to get enhanced in their abilities. You're also going to see, I think, a lot more backup positions in dealerships where people can do multiple jobs. Because as I used to call it, the position of one. You know, there's one guy that does this. When he's not there, nobody does it. Okay, I think in the future, those things are going to change. And you're going to also see a significant shift, I think, in dealerships doing more strategic business planning. Because I think that's a muscle they haven't exercised in the past because they've been really good firefighters and they've done a good job of making little adjustments and doing those sorts of things. I think in the future, the speed of change and the magnitude of change and the multiple things happening at the same time are really going to force you to do what Brian talked about, which is to have a stuntworks team that you can run these things through. Because for one person to try and do it all themselves is going to be really, really difficult. So I think those are going to be the major changes, but it's going to be very exciting to watch. I can tell you that.
Steve, great points. And Fred, I like what Steve mentioned there in terms of the speed of change. That is a very relevant term. Fred, your thoughts? You worked with a lot of retailers, and what are your observations on radical change?
Yeah, so this is really a great question when you look at the industry, and both Mike and Brian have alluded to it. I think we have to define radical if we're going to answer this question, because I think radical change in automotive doesn't necessarily look like radical change somewhere else, right? For example, we've got roughly 17,000 new car dealers. It's been 20 years since the evolution of fixed operations, electronic inspection systems. Mm-hmm. You have less than 50% of all of those rooftops actually practicing that way of doing business. So if we can't get the dealers educated and bought in to things that we've been doing for 20 years that have clear, concise, measurable results, then how do we get them to follow along in the evolution that's coming? Right? It's a great point and a great question, but we've got to we can't call evolution and change and radical thought just what the big consolidators are going to do. Sure, they lead the way and they kind of set the tone for the industry, but if the rest of the group doesn't follow along, then the results with customers continue to look like it always did. We still have stores that are practicing bad fixed operations policies. They're trying to sell things that customers don't need. They're going about those sales methods in the wrong way. If that type of thought stays in the public image, are we really viewed as having changed, right? So that's my 2 cents on it.
Brian, you're in a unique position because I still view you as a retailer from all the work you've done over the years and what you built there at Germain. Brian, your thoughts on some of the things that we're hearing?
Well, I think that Fred's dead on target. There's got to be clarity around what is the change should look like. I recently, I have a friend of mine that used to run Walt Disney World, and he told me about their digital transformation process. And there's so many parallels to what happened at Disney from 2010 to 2020 to what we're going through. And it's kind of like a sneak preview as to what the next 10 years will be like for us. And I talk to him frequently about this, and from the magic bands and getting the infrastructure and the Wi-Fi getting upgraded. All over the parks, they didn't have, it was still from the 70s, and they didn't have fiber optics. They didn't have keyless doors, and they had, they're 24/7, 365. So they can never shut down their business. They have to keep going. So they had to do it in the middle of the night, and they had to find solutions. And a lot of the things that they were going through, I'll give you one example. They were going through the magic band process in order to get people to go through the turnstiles, but they didn't communicate clearly. And I can't emphasize this enough. And this is a mistake that I made when I was back in retail, is I'm going so fast and I'm like looking to see where we're going, but I might not be communicating it along the way throughout the entire journey. Here's the North Star. Here's the lighthouse. Here's where we're going. And what happened with them is they didn't. So they started getting the people that were working at the taking the tickets were starting to sabotage the process. And because they thought that once the project was over, their jobs were going to be eliminated, which was the opposite of the truth. They had plans for that. And then after that, we're going to go to this project. So I think that taking everybody along on the ride and letting them know that this is not to replace you with a turnstile with a golden orb. It's to allow you to not sit there and do a mundane and redundant task. It's to allow you to delight guests once they come onto Main Street and be able to give you a more meaningful experience as well as the guests. And I think that's what we need to bring into dealerships. And yes, I am a retailer at heart, and I always will be.
I love it, Brian. Mike, your thoughts on some of the things that we're hearing from Brian and Fred?
You know, I would agree. I think in the spirit of the Western theme that we have going on right now, there's a Toby Keith song from back in the 90s called "A Little Less Talk and a Lot More Action." You guys are probably familiar with that. I think we're going to have to remind ourselves of that this year. Is there's so many brilliant people out there, and there's so many great conferences, right? And we're kind of in the middle of conference season, right, where you talk about so many good ideas, right? And it just, you feel like your head is full of all these wonderful things you want to do. But what are you actually going to do about it? I think that's going to be where the rubber meets the road is. You know, I work with some of the most talented, hardworking people in the automotive industry every day, right? We've got tremendous teams. But when we talk about things like mobile service, right, we talk about it for a long time. And when we talk about things like buying cars out of the service drive directly from consumers, and Brian, we've been working with your team, you know, on how do we get better at that. There's a lot of talk about how are we going to do it. And then you follow up next month and, hey, how's it going? We're still talking about it. We're still figuring out, you know, how we're going to do it. And we need a little less talk and a lot more action if we're really going to see results and drive radical change, because we've got a ton of great ideas about how to drive radical change, but really driving it is leadership, right? It takes leaders to drive that change every single day. So that's my thoughts.
Mike, while I have you, are there changes coming that you feel are not fully understood or are underappreciated by the retail automotive industry?
Yes, I think how fast things are going to change. You know, it's really easy in the beginning of the year when it's January, February to start to say, well, you know, it's seasonal. Things are always a little slower this time of year. It's going to pick up. It's not going to pick up, right? It's going to pick up if you put in the work. But I mean, we're coming from a time where, you know, new car inventory, there was none, to now it's going to start to stack up, and it's already starting to stack up. Customers are willing to pay thousands of dollars over sticker or more for a used car even. And now we're negotiating, and, you know, we're forcing negative front end deals. We had no floor plan rates, and now they're rising at never before seen rates. I'd say we've got unprecedented amounts of trade equity the last couple of years, where if you bought a car from a customer, you know, here was the bonus. You also got $10,000 to $15,000 equity check on top of that. It was really easy to buy cars from customers the last couple of years. Now it's a lot different story. So I think, you know, this doesn't even factor in EV adoption, you know, tech shortages, all these different things that we're going to have to really face this year. But I think we're underestimating a lot of things in the retail automotive industry that we're going to have to take action on and really lead through here. I think as a whole, as an industry, we're underestimating how hard this is going to be.
Ed, when I hear take action, Ed, I think of you over there at Bozard Ford Lincoln. Your thoughts?
Well, Mike talked about it earlier with the importance of fixed ops going forward. Yeah. As we move more and more into EV adoption, the brand's going to become less important. We've seen vehicle quality improve over the last 2 decades, but now as we shift into a vehicle that has 80% less moving parts, the importance of service isn't going to be there. So when they do need that service, it's our opportunity to create that ownership experience that we want them to have. The buying experience lasts weeks, days, maybe hours, but the ownership experience lasts years. And it's up to us to make that ownership experience the best it can possibly be. And we can't do that by doing things the way we've always done things. We have to find ways to do things differently. And there's no light on the dash that's going to tell a customer their EV needs to come in for service. We got to create annualized service visits, and we got to go to them for those things, just like sending somebody to your house to service your AC unit. That's what we got to do to these vehicles. And we have to highlight that. It's predictive. It's like Fred said with inspections. 2-3 decades ago, we started doing electronic inspections, but some of us still don't do it. Well, it's no different. Take care of ourselves. The earliest, sooner we can find something going on with us, the easier it is to fix or easier it is to correct. Maybe change diet early on or whatever else. The later we find it, the harder it is to do. Same thing with a vehicle. So we have to get involved earlier and create the ownership experience that we want to have to create the brand loyalty, because the brand loyalty won't come from the shiny piece of metal. The brand loyalty is going to come from the ownership experience.
Love it. Steve, your thoughts on changes coming that are underappreciated by the retail industry?
Yeah, I think the biggest one right now is going to be the impact of software, because when you take a look at what's happening in the industry, the access to software both in the vehicle, so what the vehicle will become, because it's not going to be just like a glorified cell phone. I mean, that would be easy, but honestly, that's what people call table stakes. Okay, the thing has to perform, has to do the basic functions, and people like all these little extras they currently have. But I'm talking about the vehicle being more than that. It's going to be a hub. It's going to be a software platform. And when you start to take a look at the different ideas that, you know, Google, Microsoft, the rest of these guys have, that they're going to be able to unleash, and the speed with which software adjusts. If you take a look at how many times they tell you, oh, you need to update your laptop or you need to update this, okay? And you think of the life cycle of a car, you know, a while back it was 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, now it's 11 years. Mm-hmm. Okay, when you look at the life cycle of a computer, I don't think there's anyone on this screen has an 11-year-old computer. Okay, I just don't. That kind of change and that kind of upgrade, both in the car and then I think operationally at the dealership, the access to RPA, the access to different types of technology that will allow you to be far more efficient, far more accurate, and really enhance that customer experience that Ed's talking about. And it does both. It enhances the customer experience and it will enhance the employee's experience. And I think that's the nature of software, and I think that's going to have a very big impact.
Brian, we are hearing about the software, it seems, every day. And, you know, are there, you know, your thoughts on how that plays in?
Well, Steve and I talked about this at length maybe 6 months or a year ago, and we were trying to map it out, journey map it, and figure it all out. And the conclusion that we ran into is that there is no like silver bullet software that's going to fix this solution. It takes work, and it's going to take some knowledge and some acumen and maybe some different business skills, or you're going to have to find somebody, which is what I did at Germain, is I found Jared Kilway to, you know, so that I could have somebody that could do that stuff on the fly, because to go through a traditional process and submit stuff into a queue and everything, we weren't able to be that agile in that environment. So I think that having that mindset that you can't just go to NADA and go to a booth and buy a widget, and the way you used to, oh, this website better than this website, you know, those days are over. Now it's about connecting the actual technology and weaving it into your process so that they kind of become one. You know, I'll use the Disney analogy again. As guests were going through, they were finding out information of how they were buying and where the traffic patterns, so they could change the queues. The second thing is what Mike brought up. You know, we're working on implementation at AccuTrade, for instance. And what I'm coming to the realization of is no different than in retail. I've got to remove the roadblocks for the associates, and I've got to remove roadblocks for dealers now. And I've got to be able to create ways that are more sticky. We're releasing a QR code and Kling and table toppers for getting values on your vehicle in the service department. And that's going to be part of our standard package, where if a client's there, it'll just say, scan, you want to know how much your vehicle's worth? Scan me. And it'll go right into the experience. And also provide attribution for our dealers, because that's another thing that they don't need to be doing. So I think that, you know, it's starting with removing roadblocks and making the path clear for your associates first. The consumers is a byproduct of that. If you make it easier for your associates, it'll become easier for the consumers.
Brian, as a follow-up, will this connected software enabled vehicle, is this going to ultimately change the automotive retail business model?
Yes, but I don't think in ways that everybody does think. I think it's going to enhance it. I think it's going to increase the throughput of how many ROs an ASM can write, how many cars a vehicle, a salesperson can sell, how many vehicles they can acquire, and they can do it in a decentralized manner, no differently than with remote work. what Ed's doing with these remote service vans. I mean, I picture a world, and we do business with the largest wholesaler, the second largest wholesaler in the world right now. And they have an amazing business model where they have single mothers and people scattered all throughout the United States that are acquiring vehicles. And the forward thinkers like Mike and what he's doing, they're seeing that. And right, it might not pay dividends today, but I think this is the most important thing. You take a look at anybody when some disruption comes in, like COVID, the ones that put the work in before that immediately saw a spike. So it might not be an overnight success, but you'll be poised to get your unfair share of the market when it does turn, and it's going to.
Great conversation, everybody. I want to go to our last question, our lightning round, and I want to start with Fred, and then we'll go to Ed and Steve and Brian, and we'll ask Mike to bring it home. And Ed, I know you're very much involved in this as well. Fred, what do you see as the biggest changes that we're going to need to be aware of, that will need to be made at the retail operations side over the next 5 to 10 years? What do you see as you look into your crystal ball?
It's a great question. And, I spent the last few years, as the lead on the DMS, trying to stay ahead of what do we have to do to be ready for the dealers as those changes take place. And it's interesting. None of us here could say with any level of certainty that we know where we're going, right? It's not, as business leaders, it's not why we're the leaders. We're the leaders because we know how to innovate and react as things change. If I were a betting man and I were, able to actually predict and put my money behind it, I think Steve brought it up before. I think we start seeing sales guys also doing the F&I work. I think we see the model on the sales floor change dramatically. I think it has to. I think with the advent of all of these new OE opportunities coming up where customers are going to have a choice of dealing directly with an OE versus dealing with a independent freestanding dealership group. I think all of those things are going to change the way we have to react. And rather than predict where we're going to be, I think my prediction is we better be really, really sharp and really, really quick at being able to shift and change as those things come up, because we don't know what they're going to create.
Good point, Fred. Ed, your thoughts on biggest changes, loaded question that'll need to be made by retail operations over the next 5-10 years.
Well, like what Fred said about one person handling it all, and we have shifted to single point of contact here as well, because that is important. Our customers have told us for years that we hate the F&I office, and we've done nothing about it. So that's one for an in-store transaction. But we also got to embrace remote transactions. We still resist it, and we'll do it if we have to. But we have to embrace remote transactions. And then on the fixed ops side, we have to embrace over-the-air updates. We got to control it. But it's much easier for you to call in with an appointment or set an appointment or whatever, and then I can call you and do a push update to where you never have to come in. Or if it's anything safety-wise, yes, maybe I have to come to you or you have to come in. But what if your vehicle improves twice a week because of over-the-air updates? You're doing other things to create the brand loyalty, and we got to do so many more things in the future to create brand loyalty than what we've ever done before. It's important for us to embrace them. And to promote them and to push them out there and to let customers experience them rather than block it.
Ed, how many mobile units today at Bozard Ford Lincoln?
Not near enough. We're running 10 and I could use 40.
Ed, can that model be replicated throughout the country at other dealerships?
Absolutely. Anything and everything we do here is duplicatable. We're not doing anything state of the art. We're doing things different. We're just looking, how can we improve this? How can we improve that? And then we find a way to go do it. Rather than talk about it, man, if this was different, don't wait for change to happen. Create the change.
Lot less talk and a lot more action. Love it.
Absolutely. Mike hit it out of the park with that one.
Steve Westner, biggest change is coming.
Yeah, I think, Ed's talked about it, but I do think that truly customer-driven operating systems in the dealership. In other words, your first lens is, how is this looking to the customer? Not how is this convenient for me and easy for me. And I think customers are going to have the ability to make so many choices and have so much information that, quite honestly, in many ways, they're going to be overwhelmed too. And they're going to be very happy if they have a place like Ed's place where they know somebody, they trust somebody. And I think that personal relationship is going to be critical. And how you're viewed within your local area by your customers is going to be the single biggest driver in your survivability in the future. It just is. And the more that mindset you have of let the technology take care of the grimbly stuff, don't stand there in front of the customer tacking on your little board, talk to them, engage them, speak to them, listen to what they have to say, hear what they're saying so that you can truly understand. Because for most people, if their car's down, if there's a problem with it, that's a highly stressful situation that impacts so many other parts of their lives. And you sitting there tacking away on your board to make sure you got the VIN number right, all of that stuff should be automatic. All of that stuff should just be populated based on a scan of a QR code, or as Brian talked about before. And then your ability to empathize, to speak to the customer, I think those skills are going to be extremely important in the future. And that's why I say working with technology as a partner is going to be a skill that employees are going to have. Because as I've said before, the computer is not going to take your job away, okay? The person who's going to take your job away is the guy who can work really, really well with technology and still be the one engaging the customer. That's the guy that's going to take your job away. So I think those skill set improvements are going to be critical going forward.
Brian Kramer, biggest changes coming.
So I think that one of the biggest changes is that everybody in the retail automotive side, and I think this is the most exciting time that in the history of automotive retail, really, if you embrace correctly. But I think that everybody needs to embrace the fact that it doesn't have to be perfect. It's about progress. It's not about perfection. And it doesn't have to be fully baked. And a lot of people fail to take action because they're waiting until they have the perfect plan. And the reality of it is, it's like short sprints. You've got to go through, okay, where are we at on this? Do a pulse check. And the answers that we're looking for, at least that from my opinion, is they're not in the automotive industry because we haven't been there yet, right? But there's a lot of other verticals that have, and two that come to mind specifically are, the grocery industry, and the other industry that has gone through it is the cell phone industry. So they've gone from a OEM direct franchise model to a hybrid system, and with over-the-air updates. So I look to see what mistakes did they make and what can we learn from that to avoid those pitfalls and those landmines, and what happened to all the franchise operators of Verizon stores and AT&T and Singular and all those things that don't exist today, T-Mobile, that didn't make the digital transformation journey. And in retrospect, I'm sure a lot of them are looking at it and saying, why did I sell my franchise, or why didn't I adapt and become a multi-rooftop cell phone provider? So I think that that's a foreshadowing of the future. But really, the point with the cell phones and the grocery stores is that people expect the same experience now. Just like with Amazon, they expected it with those two. They're expecting the same level of service regarding whatever the product is. And we're just the product that needs to deliver that level of experience.
Wow. Mike Cavanaugh, you're going to have the last word.
All right, great. So, I mean, I think if we're talking about changes over the next, 10 years or so that we're going to have to be ready for in retail operations and what we can do to kind of navigate that, I think we focus a lot on the tactical things. We need to do this in service. We need to do this in sales. We need to do this in F&I. I really think there's a lot of leaders that hop on these, right? That really listen to all the great things that, smart folks like the guys on here have to say. I think you have to start to think about frameworks and your responsibility as a leader to be able to challenge the status quo constantly, right? To look at your business, right? If you are the fixed operations director, right? Look at your business and say, man, if the only reason we do it this way is because we've always done it this way, what do we need to look at differently, right? If you're a GSM, right, look at that side of the business. If the only way we've ever done things this way is because we've always done them this way, let's look at it differently. And I would say the other thing is, don't let, Tesla's stock going down or the kind of obvious demise of Carvana lull you into sleep. I see so many negative comments, and one, putting negativity out in the world and hoping anybody fails is just never a good recipe for happiness for anybody, right? So for one, I hope the industry stops it as a whole. But for two, don't let that lull you into sleep to think that, you know, this model doesn't have any kind of merit or warrant, right? It may have been misexecuted, right? But there's a lot of consumers that want to be served in that way. And I would say, education wise, if no one has heard of two books, and they're by a brilliant man, it's the late Clay Christensen, Harvard Business School professor. One is called Competing Against Luck, and it talks about the jobs to be done theory. I think that's a great one for people to look at to say, what job is the customer hiring you to do? It's not always what you think it is. And the other one is the innovator's dilemma. And it talks about, why do big successful companies get disrupted? And it's because they're too focused on, I don't want to kill the golden goose, right? I'm making so much gross. I'm making so much net profit. I don't want to change, because if I change, it means I'm compromising margin. But if you don't change and disrupt yourself, someone will disrupt you, right? So I would say, as a leader, challenge the status quo, look at your business through a different lens, through a different framework, take advice from Brian, right? Look at other industries and see, you know, what can I do to better serve my customers? But we're going to have to challenge the status quo and question, you know, anything that's gotten us successful so far, because it's not going to get us as successful as we'd like to going forward.
What a great discussion. I want to thank Fred Forden, Ed Roberts, Steve Westner, Brian Kramer, and Mike Cavanaugh for your time here today at the Fixed Ops Roundtable. Very impressive. A lot of notes. We'll have to come back and pick this up in the future. I like it a whole lot. A great discussion, everybody. The leading radical change in automotive retail panel here today at the Fixed Ops Roundtable.